He got hold of his gun, a Luger, got his driver. It was a simple execution.
On the 9th of March 1966, inside the Blind Beggar pub in London's East End, feared enforcer George Cornell was gunned down. His killer was Ronnie Kray.
My husband said, the Krays have been arrested. I said, oh, they've been arrested before. He said, no, this is very serious. They've been arrested for murder.
I'm Matt from Underworld Uncut. This week we're going into our archives to examine one of the most infamous killings in British criminal history, the murder of George Cornell.
George Cornell, he grew up with the Kray twins. He knew them better than we would ever know them. He grew up with them.
George Cornell was an East Ender who had been brought up around the Cable Street area, and the Cable Street gang were in opposition to the Krays when they were growing up as kids. So the Krays and their group from Bethnal Green often fought with the Cable Street group, who were usually made up largely of dockers because it was that much closer to the docks.
He was good to me. In fact, he used to give me a £5, which I used to get £2.50 a week, you know, for working all the week in the fish market. And if I'd done a job for him, he'd give me a £5, and now and then he'd give me a £5. He'd say, get your mum a bunch of flowers. He said, and give her the fucking change. He said, I'll be after you. That was George Cornell. I liked him. I know he's probably took a few liberties like anyone else, but he was a nice bloke. He was good to me.
George was a good guy. He was all right. He even was come to work with me in my little firm at one stage, you know, and he was solid.
Well, he was friendly with the twins, but he was more friendly with the Richardsons because people really didn't want to be on the Kray firm. There weren't a lot of money involved. The twins had all the money, they could spend it like water. But the firm hardly had any money at all. That's why I never wanted to be on them. And I think maybe George Cornell had the same kind of feelings. I don't want to be on the Kray firm, there's nothing there for me. But I could exploit the Richardsons, there's money there. You know, they were more about getting hold of money, seeing opportunities and following them through. And that was because they had all the one-armed bandits, of course, in most of the clubs in London, which was like a lot of money involved there. And so that's where Cornell went and became an enforcer for them.
Started to work with the Richardsons, and he was a valued member of the Richardsons firm, and he was a very, very serious, violent man, if necessary.
There were signs obvious to the firm that George Cornell's days were numbered.
Well, George was going round and he told a woman named May Morris that her son, he was a young up-and-coming boxer at the time, and Ronnie liked him. And he went and told May Morris, the boy's mother, that Ronnie Kray was gay and he was after Mickey, her son. About 2 weeks before he killed him, I was in the Grave Morris and Reggie came up to me and he said, I want you to run us somewhere in a minute. And I took him up to the Stalk in Swallow Street, the club. And it was early in the evening, 8 o'clock. You know, they don't start business till like 10, 11 o'clock at night. And when we arrived there, George Cornell was sitting at a table with a drink. And Ronnie went to me, come, we'll sit on this side. I want on another table. I don't want to sit with that him, he went. He was mumbling, he used to mumble, Ronnie. And he mumbled for about 10 minutes. I had a couple of drinks and Reggie talked to George Cornell. And when we come out, they never said a word to one another in the car. I drove all the way back from the West End to Whitechapel. They never said one word to one another.
Tensions between Ronnie Kray and George Cornell continued to build.
He'd just been to visit, I think, little Jimmy Andrews, who had been shot in the leg. Him and LB Woods. And as they were coming away, George see the Blind Beggar. Oh, he said, look, the old Blind Beggar. LB, let's go in there for a drink. And they went in, and someone told Ronnie.
On the 9th of March 1966, shortly after 8:30 p.m, Ronnie Kray entered the Blind Beggar pub.
He and Barry, who'd never done anything, he went with him and fired a gun into the ceiling, never thinking for 1 minute that Ronnie was going to kill George Cornell.
In an almost empty pub, George was sat on a stool at the far end of the bar.
He said, I pointed it like that. I said, I pulled the trigger. I said, what did he do? What did he... He started to see fear in his eyes when he saw the gun.
Ron Kray entered and shot George Cornell in the head.
How can a normal man go in a pub in daylight and shoot a man in the head?
Ronnie Kray walked out of the pub without a word and slid into his waiting car. When police stormed in, the silence was absolute. No one had seen a thing. George Cornell was pronounced dead on arrival at hospital.
Never, ever, ever kill anyone yourself. Get somebody else to do it. What did he do, Ronnie? He walked in the Blind Beggars and he shot George Cornell stone dead in front of people in the pub. George Cornell was a violent man, and when he got killed, people say, well, it goes with the territory.
London's Underworld each had their own theories as to why Ronnie Kray shot George Cornell.
Well, that's the tragedy. He fell in love with a girl from South London, from Gangland Castle. Very nice girl, top shoplifter. Fell in love with her, married her and moved over to her. And Reggie and Ronnie couldn't handle that. They thought he had deserted them by moving over there. That's where they were on very bright there. Instead of congratulating him, have an happy marriage, George, good luck, terrific, and that. But they held that against him. They thought he deserted them. That's how daft they were there.
Cornell had a fight with Ron Kray and had beaten up Ron Kray quite badly, so Ron had a grudge against Cornell. And Cornell had also thrown a very nasty insult at Ron Kray as well. So when he found out that Cornell was drinking in the Blind Beggar pub, he decided to take his revenge. He got hold of his gun, a Luger, got his driver, they drove to the Blind Beggar pub. It was a simple execution. It was pretty straightforward.
And they thought he'd moved over to the Richardsons, which wasn't true at all. That's why he got shot dead. Simple as that.
The real motive behind the murder remains debated, and every insider tells it differently.
He was in the Brown Bear in Aldgate, George. Ronnie Kray found out where you've got little spiders, little grasses like going about. So, anyway, Ronnie Kray's got his driver, take him down there, and he's going to stick it on Georgie Cornell. When Georgie come out the pub, they had a fight, Georgie knocked him out. That's where he was an embarrassment to him from that way. And that's why he shot him in Blind Beggars. So you've heard so many tales, people make their own stories up, you know.
I think personally he'd insulted Ronnie and he had to be dealt with. I mean, somebody called Ronnie a fat puff. What happened? The guy got his jaw broke. Donahue, who was one of their henchmen, one of their chief henchmen, he got shot for an insult. So they were, it could not take an awful lot for Ronnie to want to kill somebody.
Cornell's murder sent shockwaves through the underworld, but for some, it came as little surprise.
I went out with a mate of mine, Mickey Holland, we went fishing. And I said to Ronnie, I'll see you tonight, like I won't be out today. And me and him went fishing. We got back in London about 6 o'clock. Someone said, George Cornell's got shot in the Beggar. Oh, when you're joking, I knew right away who'd done it, It was no news to me, I knew.
Ronnie, when he didn't take his Stemisol, which was a drug to keep him, his paranoia and everything else down, he was out of control. And it could have happened to anybody. Hence what happened to the Blind Beggar. He just walked in and shot a guy.
Well, I just don't know what come over Ronnie. That's why I say on those drugs, when he got these manic urges on him, he would go out and do something really dangerous. He was a dangerous person. And nobody knew what he was going to do. He just went and did it. I mean, he just walked in there in front of witnesses and loads of people and shot the man in the head. And it's a miracle shot because his blinders about, he couldn't see it to drive or anything. It was just a fluke, really, how he did it.
Everyone knew who killed George Cornell. It still took police 2 years to find witnesses willing to talk. One by one, they turned the firm against the Krays. And in the time it took to bring the case together, a second murder took place. Reggie had repeatedly stabbed Jack the Hat McVitie. Police believed they had enough evidence for 2 murder charges. In a dawn swoop on the 9th of May 1968, Scotland Yard apprehended the Krays and their remaining loyal associates in a series of sudden arrests.
The first I knew about it, funnily enough, was from the newspaper the next morning. I was married at the time. My husband said, the Krays have been arrested. I said, oh, well, they've been arrested before. You know, why is it on front page of like 4 or 5 newspapers? He said, no, this is very serious. They've been arrested for murder. And, you know, quite innocently, you say, murder? Who's murdered? Who have they murdered? You think they're talking about these 2 people that I'm in their mother's home every week. I've been out with them socially. I've been into nightclubs where they've been gentlemen, and you wouldn't even swear or be rough when they were there, when women especially was concerned. Who did they murder? And they said, well, apparently they've murdered somebody in the Blind Beggar pub, and Reggie's I said, I can't believe it, let me read it. Then you start reading in the evening news and all the other newspapers, and I thought, wow, I better go and see Violet, because she must be devastated. And when I got there, she was crying, and one of her sisters, I think it was May, was in with her, and really, I said, what's happened, Violet? She said they just apparently arrived at 6 in the morning and just didn't even knock, kicked the door off. And then she said, can they do that? She said, and they've taken them away. She said, and apparently I can't see them till tomorrow. She said, how could they murder anybody? Who would they have to murder? I mean, you know, Ronnie in his dark mood, she'd say, he'd just have a fight and it would all be over. But she could never see either of her sons being murderers.
He used to go into these manic, depressive mood swings, you know. And you never knew what he was going to be from one day to the next.
The trial began in January 1969, but this wasn't just for one murder. Controversially, this trial was for 2.
So the submission was these 2 brothers had both been charged with murder. The George Cornell murder, there was the McVitie murder, where several of us were charged. So what they said was, because it was alleged, and I never heard that, I've done mine, you do yours, they were able to join up the 2 murders together. They joined the 2 trials together. It's been the first time in history they ever did it, and I don't think they've ever done it since, where they've joined up 2 murder trials together. Because normally, the Cornell murder would have stood on its own, and it would have had no impactment on the McVitie murder, or the McVitie murder would not have had any impact on the people involved in the Cornell murder. But they joined them both together, and that's the way the trial went.
Well, the longest trial in British history up to the time, and every morning, every night was on the news. You saw the vans coming in with the noise, crowds outside.
I sat through the whole Cornell case, like a couple of other people, and their names wasn't mentioned once through the whole prosecution case. So I said, what am I doing? They're supposed to have met all the defence lawyers and had severance of the 2 trials. So there were 2 separate trials with separate juries. But of course, they're looking at me for how many weeks did the first trial? About 4 weeks in the Cornell case. And the master was saying, what's he doing sitting in the dock there, you know? His name's not been mentioned once. There's no, you know, and that wasn't. My name wasn't even mentioned once, but I had to sit there. And I said, I'm going to not refuse to go in the court. I'm going to stay in my cell. And he said, don't do that. And the lawyer said, you'll upset Melford. You'll upset the judge, you know, and he'll get the needle with you. I said, that's all right, but that's nice, isn't it? Threatening and intimidating me, you know, that's justice for you, yeah?
Why, at the time, why the hell was Freddie Foreman standing there? He wasn't what we call part of the Kray gang. He was a South Londoner. I'd met him several times, always a gentleman to me.
Oh, they were selling tickets to get in the public gallery, yeah. They were standing in queues outside and making them money out of it. And you used to get film stars turn up, the famous Hollywood film stars, if they was over here, they would be sitting in, because it was 6 months of it, going up and down every week.
When I went to court on this certain day, I went with an old friend of mine from the East End, an old villain, but not involved with the twins. He said, "Look up there, who's sitting up there in the gallery?" And I just looked at 30 people. He said, "That's Charlton Heston." I said, "Don't be..." You know, you'd seen Ben-Hur and all these things. I said, "Don't be ridiculous." He said, "It's Charlton Heston." Oh, I thought, well, what's he doing there? Surely he can't be a witness. Was he sitting in the gallery? But that's the sort of macabre things that happened at this trial, that, you know, a lord turned up one day and a film star the next day, and then one of the biggest film stars in the world at the time, Charlton Heston, and that was all splashed across the paper. Did they know Charlton Heston? How was he? Could he be involved? Had they met him when they were in America? Of course they didn't. He was in London at the time, heard about this magnificent trial that was going on, and had nothing to do that day, and took himself to the Old Bailey. I mean, it's quite... You can't believe it, but it's true.
At first, it looked like the Krays were untouchable. No one was crazy enough to take the stand against them. But inside that courtroom, everything was about to change.
Then, all of a sudden, came the witnesses, and when you looked up, you thought, well, what's he doing there? Surely he should be in the dock with the twins, because he's a member of the firm. He's done skullduggery. You know, Donahue. What's Donahue standing in the witness box for? This tall, gangly man, and then all of a sudden he started telling all the stories about what they had done, and all the money changing hands, and the violence, and the fact that you know, he knew about the 2 murders. So I thought, oh God, it's going wrong, and I don't think I'll come back. But I did go back one other time after that, near into the end, when it was all going wrong, and all of a sudden, the worst thing that happened, the barmaid. Once that barmaid walked into that court, and I looked at the twins, and they were shocked. They never dreamed that barmaid, after all this time, in fear of her life, would ever be made to come forward. But Nipper Reid used her that was his trump card. And of course she was perfect, because she immediately said, "That's the man, that's Ronnie Kray." And, you know, when the defence said to her, "Well, how do you know it's Ronnie Kray? You know, has he ever been in your pub before? Did he use that pub?" Which he never did, because he hated the pub. He never ever went in the Blind Beggars except that one night. Look what happened. She said, "No, but I know it's Ronnie Kray, because I saw him walk in and shoot Mr. Cornell." "But you said you were down in the cellar." Well, I had to say that because I was told to say that, and I was in fear of my life and of my family's lives. I knew then that was the end.
I had my doubts until the barmaid got in the dock. This young girl, or young woman, spoke like an angel, and you could not fail to listen and be moved by the things she said, by the fear. Although she could give evidence, or previously, you know, give a statement that she never knew what had happened, you could tell this was a girl that was speaking the truth.
On the 4th of March 1969, justice was delivered. Ronnie Kray was convicted of the murder of George Cornell, joined by his associate, John Ian Barry.
Just before that trial, remember, the Richardson had got 20 years. So they're thinking to themselves, well, you know, maybe they just want to get rid of the gangs of London. We are the next ones. They're over south. We're the East End. It's our turn. So you can imagine the shock when the judge said, you know, society has earned arrest from you. You're going away for 30 years. The minimum of 30 years. You're getting life, but the minimum. Had he not added that bit on, had he said life, it can mean 15 and onwards. But when he said the minimum of 30 years, the press went mad, because I think nobody in the press thought they'd get 30 years. And Violet, I think that's when her world crumbled, because she's thinking, well, they're 35. They're never going to be free in her lifetime. You know, they'd be 65, and she probably would be long gone.
Can I tell you a little story? If you go back to biblical times, you've got Moses with a staff. In hand, it was in control. The minute he throws that staff on the floor, it turns into a snake. Out of hand, it's out of control. And that was Ronnie Kray. Without the medication, without proper support, that man should have been put somewhere whereabouts he would have been taken care of, looked after in the proper way. And he had like a still vice-like grip on Reggie's emotions, and I think many things happened that would never have happened, both to Charlie and Reggie, if it hadn't have been for Ronnie, you know.
The murder of George Cornell marked a turning point in London's criminal underworld. A brutal act that set the downfall of the Kray twins in motion. Ronnie died behind bars on the 17th of March 1995. We hope you enjoyed digging into the archives with us to examine the murder that ended the Krays' grip on London's underworld. If you want to watch more from Britain's underworld, from prison stories to murder mysteries, make sure to like, subscribe and hype. This is Matt from Underworld Uncut. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.